Have you ever had a game in Overwatch 2 where the enemy team is becoming a problem by taking advantage of the high ground or one-shotting your team? You'll notice that tanks such as Reinhardt, Zarya, or Ramattra have a much harder time contesting enemies holding these positions. But not everyone knows how to play dive tanks. So if you watch this video all the way to the end, this video is going to teach you how to play
Monkey!
No, his name's
Monkey!
No, his name's
Monkey!
Alright, y'all know his name. I'm going to teach you how to play Winston. I'm going to first briefly break down his abilities so we're all on the same page, then talk about positioning, strategy, and other useful info as the video goes on. His Tesla cannon will be his primary weapon, and it has both a primary and secondary fire. His primary fire deals damage to enemies in a cone-shaped area of effect in front of him, and it's an excellent tool for dealing with large groups of enemies, especially when they're behind shields and at low HP, because his primary fire's damage can still damage through shields. The primary fire doesn't have too much range though, so you're going to need to be close to your target. It's really good at destroying symmetric turrets too for your team, so keep that in mind. On the other hand, his secondary fire can be charged, and it shoots an electrical projectile that can hit targets at range, even snipers in the back. So you can get some damage in early before jumping in. Next, his barrier projector is a spherical shield with 650 shield health that deploys at Winston's position. This ability has a 12-second cooldown, 12 seconds y'all, that's a long time, and it's a good tool to create a barrier around yourself or teammate to absorb damage, but it can also break your enemy's line of sight with their supports, cutting enemies off from supporting each other. Since this ability is on a 12-second cooldown, you want to be smart about how you use it. This makes barrier projector really useful for protecting yourself, your teammates, or isolating key targets to prevent them from receiving healing from their supports. This is an essential ability when diving on targets, which we'll talk about later in the video on who to dive. Then of course, we have his most usability, Jump Pack. With a 5-second cooldown, Winston can launch himself in any direction and deal some light damage to any enemies he lands on top of. Use this ability to contest enemies on high ground, and in combination with barrier projector, and it will make contesting high ground much easier. Winston's ultimate ability, Primal Rage, grants him 500 extra health, restores his health completely, and changes how he plays, with his jump pack ability being reduced to 2 seconds. His primary fire in this state becomes a crowd control melee attack that does 40 damage per hit and knocks back enemies. His ultimate can clutch a fight when used appropriately, making it much easier to contest and single out targets he otherwise wouldn't be able to contest so easily, and it can also be used to save himself if his health drops too low. Those are his abilities, so now that we understand what he does, let's talk about his playstyle and how you should be playing him. As an aggressive and highly mobile tank, you should be focusing on diving squishy characters when you notice they're vulnerable. It's also your responsibility to contest enemies on higher ground so that your team isn't at a disadvantage. You have to be smart about how you engage the enemy, who you engage, and when you've decided to begin the engagement. Are there too many? Who is vulnerable at any given moment? Are you making space? Where's your team at? Is your team safe? This is how you should be thinking as a Winston player. Winston's shield can absorb only so much damage, and it won't protect him from everything, especially if surrounded by 3 or 4 enemies. So make sure you take advantage of line of sight and use cover to better focus down key targets. Typically, you want to coordinate your dives with your team and have a specific target in mind when you're going in. If you solo queue, you want to get your team grouped up and ping whoever it is you're trying to take out so they know. If you start taking too much damage, don't commit too hard to the dive. Always peel back to your team to get healed up and keep your support safe. When diving Ana specifically, you're going to need your shield because she has a lot of crowd control and can anti-nade you or sleep dart you, which puts you at a massive disadvantage. Playing around your barrier projector by stepping inside and out of your shield will also make it slightly harder for your enemies to damage or weaken you. This is like dancing between cover. A big tip is breaking the enemy's support line of sight with their teammates using your shield. This is an underrated strategy that the best Winston players abuse to win games. To maximize your damage output as Winston, you're going to want to learn this damage combo when diving a target. Before you've begun the engagement, when you're at range, you want to zap squishies with your secondary fire. Then when you see a squishy somewhat vulnerable, you're going to want to evaluate the jump you're going to have to make, try to zap them at the peak of your jump, activate your primary fire as you collapse on them, and before you hit the ground, melee them so they experience a burst of damage they have never even seen before you've even landed. And y'all correct me on this, but doesn't the landing effect cancel out Winston's melee animation? Because if it does, then even more reason to melee before landing. Next, let's talk about when you should play Winston. I'm gonna keep it real with y'all. If you're a flexible tank player, Winston is a problem solver for you. There's nothing more unfulfilling as a tank than the feeling of not being able to do anything against DPS or supports that are a problem for your team if you're just the wrong tank. You want to focus down the squishies, but be smart about your use of cover. I don't want to see anybody who's watched this video to dive tanks at full HP. Please, don't be that player. If the enemy tank is on your team and you need to peel for your team, that's fine. But never dive a tank that is full HP with their team. It's just not going to work and you're going to be wasting your team's time. If the enemy has snipers, Winston plays terrific against them and he will annoy the heck out of them by contesting them, which is going to be good for your team because it takes away the threat of being one shot from across the map at the very least. If they also have like a really good Genji, Sombra, or Moira that's harassing your teammates, then you can be a nightmare for them and it might even be an easy kill for you in some instances. Seriously. Now, if the enemy is running a brawler style of comp, which are teams that seem really tanky and self-sustaining, then you probably don't want to go Winston against that. You know, like a team with a pocketed Reaper, Ana, Reinhardt, Lucio, that's not going to be a game you're going to have any real advantage in playing Winston. So understand that he does not work every game. I want to talk about positioning now. It's important to stay within line of sight of your team as your enemies get used to your dives. They're going to start testing possible solutions to deal with you, and if you break line of sight and they catch you slipping, you're going to find out what happens. So make sure that you always maintain this line of sight for the majority of the engagement. It's also important for you to look for opportunities where you can peel for your backline, especially if they are low on health or have been knocked away from their team by an enemy ability. So make sure to turn around and not get too tunneled on what's going on in front of you if the enemy has flankers themselves. You cannot be healed or win the game either if your supports are getting harassed and you're doing nothing to help them. They need you and you need them. So make sure to do everything in your power for your supports to play without any issues. If there are multiple enemies pressuring your backline, you can use primal raids to jump onto them and knock them away from your team. You can also use primal raids to knock away your team's biggest threat in a pinch if you see an enemy about to use their ultimate to wipe your team like a Reaper or Genji. Don't forget your weaknesses either. Winston has a high HP pool, but he doesn't have any self-sustain outside of Primal Rage, so you need to be smart about your jump pack and bury your shield to avoid jumping into a colossal amount of damage. You cannot waste your shield because it's a long cooldown and you need it to be successful. Each use of your shield needs to bring value for the team. Winston is one of the most played characters at the highest level in Overwatch League, and pros pick him because of the utilities I've described in this video. But of course, everyone's not going to be playing like a pro immediately after watching this video, but it does help to learn from others. If you like this video, please hit the little thumbs up button below. It helps out a lot, and take a look at my other videos for Overwatch too. I can teach you a new hero, share my thoughts about the game, or give you a new tip. Just absorb a ton of information about the game now so you can hop in your next match with a fresh mindset. I'll see you in the next video, and thank you for watching.